Hey guys, Tom here. Before we dive into this episode, I just want to tell you about a few awesome free resources we have available for anyone watching this video. Firstly, if you head over to my website, thomasbrettmixing.com, you can download a free 70-page ebook I've put together called Mixing Simplified. Within this book, you'll find tons of tips, tricks, and advice on how you can go about achieving great sounding mixes in the simplest, most easy to understand way possible. You should get a pop-up asking if you'd like to download the PDF when you first arrive on the website. But if you don't, you can also find links at the bottom of every page or on the store section of the website. Aside from the free ebook, if you head over to the blogs section of the website, you'll also find a huge collection of educational articles that I've written over the years for top audio education platforms like the Pro Audio Files, Unstoppable Recording Machine, and Joey Sturgis Tones. One final thing before we get on with the video. In the very near future, me and Max are planning to do some video segments where we review your music. If you'd like us to potentially take a listen to one of your tracks and give you some fairly in-depth feedback and advice on what you can do to improve the mix, recording, songwriting, structure, or pretty much whatever we hear in the track, feel free to submit a link to your song using the Contact Us page of the website, along with your contact details. Every now and then, we'll pick out a few random submissions to include in our upcoming videos. Anyway, let's get back to the podcast. I think let's dive straight into our topic for this week. I think in this episode, we're going to be talking about editing, correction, maybe some false information that's out there. I'll start off by saying this. I'll start off with a statement and then we can go from there. I think maybe most of the public, most of the regular listeners don't have any idea how much correction goes on behind the scenes when making an album on recording. What do you think?
And also it's one of those misconceptions because like with mastering, there are so many misconceptions, but mastering is a thing that only musicians know about. While editing, especially when there is the word autotune involved in a conversation, that's like the thing that most misconceptions come from.
Well, I think, I think a big part of that misconception comes from the auto part of the auto-tune. Auto-tune is obviously
definitely.
Auto-tune is a specific plugin. It's kind of a term that's thrown around as a kind of blanket term for a lot of things. But it's the auto thing that people think, oh, you just put auto-tune on it and it fixes the whole song for you and makes it perfect.
And you don't have to sing and it will make you sing perfectly, which is completely false. Yeah. You got to sing great and no amount of tuning and actually no amount of time correction, which is as important as tuning, and auto-tune doesn't do time correction. So only proper take comping. So you compile a dozen of takes into one great performance, word by word, syllable by syllable, vowel by vowel. Then you timeline it, then you do the auto-tune, then you do some backing vocals, maybe some additional synth layers like vocoders and stuff. If it's like a bombastic, huge vocal arrangement, maybe not, but that might save a bad vocal performance and turn it into a mediocre or listenable or like pro-sounding, unremarkable pop performance. But to have a really strong performance, even if it's out of key a little bit, you got to be a great singer. At least you got to be a good singer. So autotune is not something that is used to make a horrible singer sound great. And it will actually not work in its automatic mode on a bad singer, because bad singers are usually so out of key, it will mistrigger all the time.
Yeah. Well, let's take a step back, and I'll before we dive into the deep stuff, I'll kind of approach this from the perspective of an audience member. I'll say something like, Bohemian Rhapsody, in the 70s, a million layers of vocals, everything sounds perfectly in tune. It's a great song. It's one of the most successful songs of all time. Oh, people should be able to do that. If they can't do that, they shouldn't be a musician. That's a valid perspective that a lot of audience members had, that I'd say I probably had when I was first getting into music as well. Like, I think a lot of people, when they first get into music, or even older generations as well, they think, oh, you should be able to sing perfectly. If not, you're not a real musician. So what is the argument for editing and auto-tune, in your opinion? I mean...
Well, as everything, there should be balance in everything in life. And with editing, it's the same thing, because certain genres of music, if you want to really enjoy great performance in the studio, I'm not saying in the studio, but as a listener, so you put your earbuds on and you're listening to a nice mix. Everything is super clear, super detailed. You hear every element. You will hear things that you are unable to hear during the live show, where there's loudness, adrenaline, reverb, crowd around, and everything else. So what sounds perfect, flawless, super in tune, super in time, live, is very, very far from that in the studio environment. It will sound horrible. It will sound like shit. I first encountered when we started recording our rehearsals on a multi-track. So we were rehearsing. I was bringing home the multi-tracks. I was listening and analyzing, and I realized that it sounds so much worse than I felt it sounding during the rehearsals. It's not only because we didn't really play and sing tight enough, but it's because the perception is different.
Yeah.
So there has to be a balance. On one end of that balance is the takes must be flawless. But then let's take it to completely absurd levels of that.
Yeah.
Let's say every musician should be able to perform the full album from start to finish in one take, otherwise they suck.
Yeah.
Does it sound healthy to you? Can you name me one musician who can do that? I know there are so many great musicians who could do that and it would sound okay, but they could do it even better
if
by
they had
using the
takes.
healthy amount of technology, even better. And that's the balance. So you got to be a good musician, but you also got to be able to use technology right, to use the proper amount of technology. So you're using a tiny amount of time correction, a bit of tuning, not necessarily auto-tune. You could use Melodyne, Revoice. There are so many. Repitch, I like Repitch. And then you get a great studio-grade, still very natural sounding record. That's how it works. And that's how it worked before, in the 70s even. They didn't use tuning software, but they were choosing takes. They were even manipulating the tape speed if it was expensive recording with lots of hours of engineering involved. They had some tricks to make the performances better.
Yeah. Well, it's also the fact that I think you've mentioned this before on a different podcast. Standards have changed in terms of our listening standards, our ears, what we're used to. It's a simple, in my mind, it's a simple thing of every element within the song, within the mix, needs to be somewhat in sync. And when I say in sync, I mean within the same ballpark of perfection or imperfection. Right. So in the 70s, in the 60s, whatever, you can have a slightly out of tune guitar and it's okay because the vocals are also slightly out of tune and the bass is also slightly out of tune. So everything is within this window of perfection. Whereas when you get to the point now where you have completely edited drums, this window of perfection, you know, everything is completely on the grid, completely edited guitars, everything's on the grid. And then you have this vocal, it doesn't sync up in terms of, it sticks out like a sore thumb. So you have evertunes on guitars and every note's in complete tune. You have evertune on bass or you melodyne the bass or you auto-tune the bass or whatever. So everything is exactly hertz perfect in terms of tuning. Then you can't go and put a really... You can. No one's saying you can't. But if you go and put a really... Even a good vocal, which is quite which fluctuates quite a bit, it might stick out in certain bits. And that's not to say that you need to go and auto-tune and make the whole thing completely robotic. It's just that there is a window within... You have to try and get that vocal down to within closer to that kind of in sync kind of level of the other instruments in terms of tuning and timing. Exactly.
And the fun thing is that, first off, so many bands want to sound organic and they say, hey, let's not edit our performances. But then they hear the first mix, they realize that they don't want that. They just had no idea how it sounds like unedited. Because not only you have that, like, say, margin of error that has to be matched in between the instruments, but there's also certain requirements because of the tones we're choosing in the modern mixes. So if you have that super detailed drum sound, not just, a puffy, rocky kick that may fluctuate around, and drums based on the overheads like, let's say, Deep Purple Machine Head 1972. Mm-hmm. Great drummer, really tight band, super tight band, but it would sound very flabby if you were to mix them like a mid-2000s metal recording with a clicky kick and lots of detail, and everything would be just in your face, and you would hear that the bass is too sharp compared to organ, and guitar is not really in tune the way it should be. I mean, all great players, I would prefer listening to that compared to many modern recordings, because it becomes quite repetitive and quite dull when everything is hertz precise, as you say. Another funny misconception is that people think that tuning is something like, as you said, auto-tune. You just slap it on and it just tunes all the notes to 0 hertz and it sounds better. It sounds worse because you gotta guess the tonality. Like bass is +10 sharp, guitar is maybe +7 sharp, synths are 0. Where should the vocals intonate, especially during the vibratos? Should they be +5 or +15 or +20? Sometimes they sound better +20. And a good tuner, a good editing engineer will feel the vocals, and they will edit vocals manually in the tuning software. Yeah. It's a lot of job. It's actually harder than just leaving them untouched.
Yeah, even like that's another misconception with people. Like, okay, you have auto-tune, which corrects to 0, which may not always work. And as you say, if you have a singer that's singing really out of tune, it's definitely not going to work because it just puts you in a completely wrong note. But even with manual editing, as you say, if you go with Melodyne and you manually edit and you select everything and make every single blob of notes to 0, it's not necessarily going to be in tune with the song. You have to do it by ear, and there's still a manual taste-related factor to that. So exactly. it's never as simple as just clicking a button and it's done. Never.
Besides, there are different vocal phrasings, there are melisms, things like that, and you cannot really edit that unnoticeably. There is a funny series of videos on YouTube. There is one guy who does it right. I think Wings of Pegasus, his channel is called. He's a great singer, as I understand, and he does it right. He analyzes the tuned vocals and he compares the, let's say, inappropriately tuned stuff
I think I've seen that.
Nice, great untuned singers. But there are some people who have no idea what tuning is, and by using the AI that helps them isolate vocals and then running them through tuning software, they say, hey, look, this note is very flat. Note is table flat. It means they're using auto-tune. Boo-hoo. In fact, it's so stupid on so many levels. First off, I know so many good singers who are capable of randomly, hitting those notes, auto-tune grade, flat. Mm-hmm. It comes out of their mouth and you think it's on auto-tune because it just randomly happens. It doesn't mean that they are so great. It's not something they want to achieve, but they are trained so hard that their vocal apparatus is capable of producing a very straight note. So all this experiment means nothing. And usually those people who think they will actually identify autotune in the recordings, they will never notice what amount of editing job was done to those vocals they're analyzing. Mm-hmm. They had no idea the amount of comping, the amount of recording sessions. Maybe it was 100 takes. What else can I say?
yeah, I mean, it's just so what? I don't understand the purpose. So what if someone's auto-tuned? That, like, if you're having to go in with an AI and kind of really analyze in depth and find, oh, look, this note's auto-tuned. Like, look, I've caught you. Like, so what? Like, people have the wrong idea. It's not this. It's not, oh, these people can't sing, they're talentless, therefore we auto-tune them to make them sound good. No, most of the time, it's not that at all. I'd say most of the time, it's just, you have to get it to a certain professional standard, even if they're a really good singer. Like, do you use any vocal correction for Jinjer, for example?
Of course. And that's a normal thing.
Now,
she does a great take.
I'm sure if you asked anyone, they'd say she's a flippin' fantastic singer. It's the same with my wife. The same with you. You're a flippin' fantastic singer. Do you tune your own vocals?
Thanks, man. I do, because if I have a good take, I love the take. I see no reason to re-record the take to hit one note tighter. I also see no reason to record another take to manually take one word and to paste it into another performance. To me, it's the same cheating as just taking that note and tuning it, let's say, 10 cents lower. Why? You know, the emotion is there. The phrasing is there. It sounds appropriate. It sounds the way I imagined it in my head. Then I just do some tuning.
Yeah.
I'm not saving a crappy, unrehearsed. So I'm not trying to turn the person who is unable to sing into the person who is able to sing. Let's say for the competition of the singers. If we had a photo, a photo competition of the prettiest lady in the world, and I would turn myself into a prettiest lady, that would be cheating. You know, but not the case with some editing. Besides, again, you know, you can blame any musician for anything. Let's say you can take a 70s punk band and blame them for being unable to play. Then you can take a band who is very good at playing and blame them for being not musical enough. Their songwriting sucks because they are concentrating on soloing all the time. Then you can take a very clean-sounding band, a very clean-sounding singer, and blame them for tuning their vocals. And it can go on forever and ever. But the truth is, there is nothing non-ethical in tuning vocals. And especially when autotune is used as an artistic effect, so when you can clearly hear that it's an autotune, hey, they are trying to create some effect. It should sound like some sci-fi synth robotic voice then. It's okay. So I actually see almost no reason. The only reason I might blame someone for autotune on the vocals or for excessive tuning on the vocals, if someone would pretend to be a great singer and would actually brag about it.
Yeah.
You know, that's the only reason for me to say, hey, this guy is wrong.
Yeah. No, I agree completely. I mean, for amateurs, for people who are new to mixing, or people who are new to recording, new to production, and maybe they have these ideas that these things are wrong. Look, the simple goal is, with myself, and I'm sure with Max as well, it just needs to get to that level where people aren't going to blatantly say that's bad. As long as it passes a threshold and there's nothing that's... We just want to make... You want to make people sound good, you know? And artists that we work with, people that we work with do have the right to say, I don't want autotune. Fine, that's your decision. I'm not going to force you to use autotune, you know? But the purpose is just to get it to that point of being where we think it's going to stand the best chance, you know? And people aren't going to say, oh, that singer sucks, because they had one bad note in a song, for example. They might be a great singer. One bad note
in a song, right.
And that's...
So we are not saving 90% of the notes. When it's 90% of the notes, we say, let's make another take.
Yeah.
And if it's 90% of the bad notes, again, we'd probably say, let's rehearse it for a week and come back next week. But when it's a couple of bad notes, I'd say more. When I'm producing a band, when I'm producing a singer, and I'm in the studio with the singer, I care about the emotion more than about all the right notes.
No, exactly the same,
and some singers are great live singers and they don't really like being in the studio forever. that's the thing with Tatiana, actually. She is really emotionally, she invests a lot of emotion into the vocal takes. And the last thing I want to do is just torture her with 20 takes until I get every little nuance right. So I'd rather get 3 great takes, choose 2 of them as a lead vocal track and lead double track for some natural chorus effects. And I will probably tune a few notes if I feel like, okay, they are not precisely there. They're like, maybe instead of being plus 25 cents on the vibrato, I want them to be plus 15 cents on the vibrato. Then I would tune them. So again, there should be no purism in music in general, because it's not building mechanism on the plant when you have strict technology, and if you're not following the technology, something bad may happen. Mm-hmm. That's music. It's for breaking the rules. So, yeah.
Yeah, and like I think you said it a few minutes ago, like when you're comping vocals, like you might purposefully choose the note that's out of tune simply because it has that character that you're looking for. And if it was just slightly sharper or slightly flatter, it would be perfect. So maybe when you're going through your first pass of comping, and I think we can maybe go a bit more in depth on our actual process, our step-by-step process of how we actually reach a fully edited final vocal. But when you're comping, you might actually end up after your first pass of comping with a vocal that has lots of out-of-tune notes, simply because when you're comping and you're selecting from however many takes you've got, in the case of Tatiana, maybe 2 or 3 takes, but I've told you before, I've worked with people where sometimes you have to get 100 takes. And maybe I'm not even listening to pitch. That's maybe not my priority at all times. Maybe I'm listening to character because that's more important, and I can always just nudge it a tiny bit with Melodyne and get it perfect. So
you don't have auto character plugin, right?
No, the character is the thing that's going to connect with it. I give this example a lot, but like 60s, 70s singers, guys like John Lennon, is he the best singer in the world? No. Is he completely in tune? No. Is he completely in time? No. But what is the thing that people like about John Lennon? It's the grit, it's the character. You know, when he screams and gets that John Lennon sound. Or David Bowie, is he a good singer? No, he wasn't back in the day. Bob Dylan.
I'd say even more. Jan Gillan, great singer, but I've been listening for some Deep Purple live shows today. Actually, today I just heard a few songs and I was like, okay, I haven't listened to that for 20 years and he's never in tune. He actually doesn't even pronounce some of the notes because he probably had too many shows during the last week, and he just cannot cope with all those gritty high notes of his. So what I mean is that we used to enjoy music that sounds completely different, and I can only imagine some scenario that never happens to me. Actually, it happened once when the band wanted to sound like an AC/DC early 80s recording or something. They wanted to record guitars together, like guitars and bass, and everything was super roomy, and I couldn't even tune the vocals because he was so raspy that no program would pick his notes clearly. That's the only scenario, apart from growling and screaming, where tuning would be completely impossible. But before I shut up, I would also say that it would be important to discuss other editing cheats that are not that obvious for the listener, because some listeners can spot autotune, but with time alignment. How many bands do you know who do not need time alignment at all?
Yeah, never happened.
We just time align anything now.
Yep.
Anything.
Yep. I mean, it's that thing I say. It's the margins. It's. I guess it starts from the drummer, doesn't it? Really, like the second you edit the drummer, you have to edit everything else. That's just simply
exactly.
That's just simply what it is.
You either not touch it, just not touch it. Keep the drums real, keep the bass real, keep the guitars real, and get away with that. Or the very second you start quantizing the drums, you're doomed.
Yep. Because you're a slave to the click. And like, the thing is, the reality is, if auto-tune... the reality is, if auto-tune is cheating, if tuning is cheating, then even clicks should be cheating, technically.
Right.
Or why don't you have a good enough why don't you have a good enough internal click, mate? You should be able to play at 157.5 BPM perfectly without a click,
together with the band. And also compressor is a cheating mechanism. Yeah. Because you got to have
you should be able to sing consistently, Yeah.
And you shouldn't use overdrive pedals because a good guitarist can really use his right hand properly straight into the amp.
Yeah, it just goes to a stupid place when like that, because that's pretty much what it is. I mean, why do you use a click? Why do you use overdrive? Why do you use compression? It's because you have an end goal in mind. You have a sonic goal and you're trying to reach it. It's the same as any other tool.
I'm actually not joking, mate. I'm actually not joking because I visited guitarist forums. I was recording demos of equipment, of custom-built amps long ago, and people were like, why are you using a tube screamer in front of the amp? You have a weak right hand, I understand. You just cannot play right. And when I say, hey, all the great guitarists, like in modern metal, they use that for specific tighter palm mutes. They're like, did you see it near them in the studio? Do you know for sure they were using it? You're just manipulating us. We know for sure you cannot play. Like, a completely toxic environment of people who don't know what they're talking about. And that's a part of being. That's the very term misconception. What we're talking about today, like not understanding why a certain technology exists. All the technologies we have, they come from healthy laziness, so to say. So there was a healthy laziness to, hey, I want my guitars to sound tighter. I will use a tube screamer with minimum drive to make my palm mute sound tighter. And all of a sudden you have all the new world of great guitar tones that were completely impossible without tube screamer. Well, same thing with compressor. Compressor might have been invented to fix the flaws, not to create those amazing effects we have now with 1176 cranked all the way up, with distressors, with multi-band compressors, things that were physically impossible. There is no such voice in nature that sounds like a heavily compressed to saturation, like 1176 vocals.
Yep.
And that's a beautiful tone that you love. Like a distorted amp, there is no guitar that sounds like that in nature, right? Same thing with tuning. There is no singer who could just perform live with movement, with lights shining on him, with all that artistic choreography they perform on stage. To create that flawless performance, they could just purely enjoy listening like that. Now, one thing is just dancing to the music or just, like headbanging to the music. Another thing is sitting at the laptop, scrolling the internet and listening to something in the background. Totally different listening environments, totally different requirements. So we're just meeting the requirement. Most of the audience will listen to the vocals and they will not really, they might spot sampled drums. Like machine gun snare, that's the big no-no. They will say, oh, something's wrong with the drums. Drums have been sample replaced. And all of a sudden, satanic laughter, sample replaced drums. The drummer cannot play, but in fact, so many drum recordings are completely sampled or sample replaced without the audience knowing it. They sound natural, they sound nice, they sound huge. There's no playing involved. And what I'm trying to say here is that there is no chance to really spot from listening where you have been tricked or not. Maybe the band is great, but they went to a cheap studio with unexperienced engineer, and that engineer could not really record them well, so they had to sample replace the drums.
Yeah.
So maybe it's not the bad drummer, maybe it's the situation.
But it's also
there are so many bands on a budget who just cannot record well.
Mm-hmm. It's also the thing of, that's another thing of like, samples are cheating. No, what was the first reason stuff like samples were used to begin with, when they were first used in the late 70s or the 80s or whatever? And it's like they just wanted a different sound. They wanted to achieve a different sound. For example, you think of stuff like the Bruce Springsteen songs, like Born in the USA, with the massive snares and all that kind of stuff, or Def Leppard or Bryan Adams, these kind of massive snare sounds, or like Phil Collins inventing the gated kind of sound in the studio when recording a Peter Gabriel album stuff. It wasn't cheating. It was just that, can these people not play? Yes, of course these people can all play. They all know what, they're all professionals at their instrument, professional engineers, all this stuff. It's not cheating. It was just they wanted to achieve a different sound. And like, that's it. Like today, you can still make a fully organic, fully real, fully live recording if you want to. But because we've all acclimatized to big, massive snare sounds and big kick sounds and stuff, maybe that's just not what you want. And in that situation, it's perfectly fine to do use samples or whatever. So it's just like people think of it as cheating or whatever, but what is the sound that you're going for? That's the real question.
You know, I've been thinking while you were talking, you made me think of another thing. Sometimes people are right. They are right in a way that how many bands among the regular working class sound engineer like myself, how many bands do you know who are perfectly capable of recording that album with completely organic sound?
Mm-hmm.
Not many. So it would be fair to say that for most of the amateur and half professional musicians, you gotta do some heavy fixing of their weak performances. Unfortunately, that is true.
Mm-hmm.
To match the super high standards of density that have been developed over the years in, let's say, in metal. I'm most confident in discussing metal recordings. So in metal, you got all those fast solos. You gotta play 16th kick drums with great power. And if you're listening to an average drummer's 16th notes, it's completely useless to just mute the microphone. You won't even trigger those kicks. You will just completely replace them by MIDI hits and just get away with it, because there is no chance you can edit them. And they are so quiet, usually you cannot hear them in the overheads anyway. So, same with guitars. How often I have to re-record guitars because it's just not worth editing. I will play those power chords, they're out of tune. So I will just play them. How many times we have to reprogram the bass? So yes, musicians are cheating, that's true, and that's a bad thing. But from what I've noticed in the professional league, so let's say biggest names on the labels, on relatively large labels, most of those bands have to perform live a lot. And those bands are usually at least okay. So they can play. There is no problem with playing. There might be problem with being an outstanding set of musicians, like, historically outstanding. There's only one Eddie Van Halen. But we're not even talking about that. We're talking about fixing performances. Being a very recognizable guitarist or very recognizable singer is a totally different thing. And that perfectly recognizable singer would be perfectly recognizable with or without autotune. Again,
it also comes, this whole argument of samples, no samples, auto-tune, no auto-tune, editing, no editing. At the end of the day, none of this matters if you're writing really good songs. I know this is a kind of different tangent I'm going to, but I think part of the problem is all of this stuff comes into such huge question simply because a lot of the bands which are relying on a lot of this stuff, it's all they've got. We play fast, and it's we play fast,
right.
or we play technical, and that's like the identity of the band. Therefore, if you don't have catchy songs, if you don't have memorable hooks, if you don't have real songs, if your song or your idea of a song, not to offend any deathcore bands or black metal bands or anything, because there are probably bands out there that write great songs, but if your whole identity as a musician or as a songwriter is, I do fast technical stuff, therefore I must do it with no samples and I must do it very, very accurately and all that kind of stuff. It's the only reason why all of this stuff, these topics we're talking about come into question anyway. In my opinion, if you have a band that writes really, really, really good songs, no one's really going to care if you've used samples or autotune or anything, I think. I mean, that's the way I view it, at least. It's like no one's talking about that stuff. They're talking about the song. And all of that stuff is just second nature. It's just like...
That's true. I don't remember how that detune tape effect was called that they invented for John Lennon because he didn't really want to record the double tracks.
Mm-hmm.
Who cared that he didn't want to record the double tracks? Who cared that they were lazy? Like especially during later years, Beatles were so, I guess, burnt out by recording stuff. Songwriting was never a problem for them. They had brilliant songs until the last day, but like when you're listening to that guitar solo in Let It Be, you can clearly hear that George Harrison wasn't really like super motivated to play the best solo of his life. The song is still amazing. The song still has historical value. And actually, what you mentioned, like the sportsmanship in certain genres of music, that would be actually the case where I would say, hey, we need to check this guy if he's as good as his recording is. So did he cheat on the recording? Can he really play those, super fast, fretless bass, technical death metal stuff with all those, I don't know, artificial harmonics, polyphonic harmonics, and all those super hard, wide chords he's playing on the fretless bass perfectly in tune? Can he do that? So sports is one thing. Sports is competition. We want to make sure that competition is fair. But when it comes to songwriting, to music, actually everything will do. If something works in the favor of the song, and it's all about songwriting.
It's a different mindset, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think
that's the only thing that matters.
Yeah. I'm not sure what my exact point is with that. It's just this thing of like song-oriented people. I think I'm a song-oriented person. I love technical stuff. I love playing technical stuff. I love mixing technical stuff. I love technical stuff. But at the end of the day, technicality means nothing to me if there's not a song in there. It can be impressive. I can see someone, there's like various YouTube drummers or whatever, they can do amazingly technical stuff. Cool, awesome, I'll watch it once, but then I'm not going to listen to it for the rest of my life every single day, am I? Whereas a really simple song that's just a really good song, regardless of whether there's auto-tune or whatever. I think of a song like, I'm not sure if you're familiar, like Post Malone, Rockstar. I'm sure you've heard that song. It's like that big hit a couple of years ago, auto-tune all over the place, just like a trappy song. The melodies are so incredibly catchy and hooky. Who gives a crap if there's auto-tune on the vocals? Who gives a crap about anything? It doesn't matter. It's a hugely memorable song. The hooks stay in your mind. And like at that point, I don't care about the details. But if all you've got is the technicality and that's all you're worrying about, maybe you've got your priorities wrong, is what I'm saying. For like the people who care so much about always using auto-tune, he's using this, whatever.
Yeah, of course it depends on what your aims are. So if you're completely clear that being technically perfect is what you really enjoy in music, that's more power to you. And you would probably become, if not the great session musician, then at least you would, succeed in what you are, what you find beautiful in music. Music is beautiful in every way, right? So if it's, again, sometimes YouTube gives me some cool technical death bass players who play fretless, and there's one young guy, I don't remember the name, but I instantly subscribe to his video because he has great taste for playing fretless bass, like those fast parts.
Mm-hmm.
And it sounds beautiful, although it's a thing in itself, and I cannot imagine myself listening to those tech death bands too much, right? But it doesn't make my skin crawl the way a good Pink Floyd song would do, or maybe even a good Dream Theater song would do. Dream Theater are another example for me of a band that can write a great song sometimes, but also can write a song that is just technically perfect without anything else. I personally find there, maybe I'm wrong, but also, let's say Dream Theater, James LaBrie is, in my opinion, very, very cool in the studio, and especially his solo albums. I'm a huge fan of solo albums, also produced by Jens Bogren. So for me, it's like best of all worlds. Great singer, great songwriting there, great song, really amazing songs. Some of the best musicians in there, and also great producer doing the mixing and everything. So James LaBrie is actually a prisoner of a very specific range the songs are in. So during the live shows, sometimes he cannot really sing everything he sings in the studio. That's a very popular thing with metal singers, actually. Most of them sound way more limited live than in the studio. That said, is it cheating for him to sing all those beautiful parts in the studio? For me, not. I realize that there are certain limitations to human anatomy. And even the great singers who are, let's say, more capable live than some other singers. Let's say, let's take Painkiller by Judas Priest. The song. Can you imagine Rob singing Painkiller flawlessly every night during a world tour, 1 year world tour? Let's be realistic, no one can. That's not what our bodies were meant to do. But I want to enjoy Painkiller to its extremity in the studio recording because it's possible. And the idea was to create this non-human, post-apocalyptic, molten metal monstrosity. That was the idea. That was the artistic vision they managed to fully implement by using studio technologies.
It's like that one scream in Number of the Beast from Bruce Dickinson.
Oh yeah,
you know,
the one they tortured him with.
You know, like how old is he now? He must be 60s or something now. Like he wouldn't be able to sing. He can't sing it like the album anymore live. Like
exactly.
I don't know. It's sorry. Go ahead, mate.
No, I mean it's a human anatomy. Especially with singers, I understand that we want the singers we admire to do it live. That's a normal thing to do. But it's also important to understand that, let's say we have professional sports, like people are lifting weights, and they have competitions. They are getting prepared for competitions for months, I guess. So they're training. Then before the competitions, they will probably, I mean, if it's some beauty standards like bodybuilding, they don't drink water for a few hours, if I'm not mistaken, just to make all those, details come to the surface of the skin to be dehydrated. I may be wrong. I'm not a professional.
No, in
that field.
There is something like that. Yeah, I remember.
So they are getting dried up to look like more like they do.
Yeah, veiny and muscular.
Yeah, and let's say competition. So that guy will lift super huge weight for the first time in his life. He'll do that and he will get the world record. Now, can you imagine him doing it every night? He will have to lift that weight every night for the rest of his life, even when he's 70. Isn't that ridiculous? Now, let's imagine that he's playing a superhero and he lifts a car. That's what Painkiller or any other ridiculously hyper-produced song that has to sound like that to deliver the emotion, to create that artistic vision. That's the superhero in musical equivalent.
Well, that's exactly...
Now,
That's exactly the standard which we're aiming for. The standard we're aiming for, it's not 100% perfect. It's not this % perfect. The standard we're aiming for is just right. You know, we want it to sound right, regardless of what that right means. And that right means a different thing depending on the particular circumstances, particular band, particular scenario, particular genre, whatever. We talked about this before, where we talked about how if you're doing a technical death metal song, it's going to require more editing than if you're doing a 70s kind of laid-back rock song, you know?
Oh, yeah.
And so
where you might even end up just, moving a few notes.
Different standards for different genres, for different songs. But there's no point in having this this simplistic viewpoint of this is how much editing I'm allowed to do, or I'm not allowed to do any editing, whatever, because that's just not going to work in every scenario. If you have that mindset of I'm not going to edit anything ever, and then you go and do a tech death band, it's going to sound like crap probably, unless you have the best musicians in the world. And it's like,
right.
Well, what's your purpose? Is your purpose to, as an engineer or as a producer, to just stick to your guns so solidly that you're willing to put out stuff that's objectively bad, potentially...
Yeah, actually, we know... I'm sorry for interrupting you. Actually, there are some producers who, because of this purist mindset, they've lost not only some of the clients, but they've lost their reputation, because they are actually... They end up becoming toxic towards the clients. The clients approach them, they want a great product. Then the producer, with that producer ego, starts actually dominating the client, saying, hey, you got to learn how to play if you want it to sound right. I'm not doing cheating here. We're not doing that in my place. That's not going to work in the long run for the producer and also for the band.
I mean, sorry,
go on.
You go ahead if you had something to add.
Nothing. I mean, in general, that's such a deep situation. I wanted to say that for anyone who's into sound engineering and listening to our podcast, it's important to do a lot of editing to understand how editing versus no editing sounds, and all those stages in between, to really understand on the intuitive level how much editing you want for a specific project. Just a few days ago, I had a project, just a single, and the band is quite an old school band, like the guys are in their late 50s, I guess. Mm-hmm. And I sent them the tracks to my assistant for editing. So he did the instrumental editing, he sent me back the tracks, and I realized that apart from a little section of the song when they are playing a modern riff, mm-hmm. a modern percussive riff, everything else sounds worse after editing. Yeah, because they are old school and they are used to play live as a band. I don't mean the whole band, but guitars in particular, they just lost that charisma. Mm-hmm. So I only used that small section of the edited multi-track, and I kept the rest of the guitars unedited because I realized that I don't care if the notes are moving around a little bit like that against the grid, but I just lost something. It was there and now it's gone. And that's the most important part of being the producer. As with everything else, as with any tool we have, be it technical stuff like EQ, compression and everything, be it artistic stuff like adding samples, adding effects, or adding huge reverbs or delays and everything. It's about the developed taste, and to develop the taste in editing, you should not be that guy who says editing sucks, blending samples suck, all that elitist stuff that just doesn't get you anywhere. You got to be a great editor. You got to spend many years mastering editing, and then you will be able to add as much editing as needed. No more, no less. and it will benefit the recording the most pleasing way, and it will not turn the singer or the guitarist or the band in general into cheaters. No way.
No, exactly. Yeah, exactly what I was saying of like, the goal is right. The goal is right. The goal isn't this, it's not that, it's not any set of rules or anything that predetermined, like that you, when you go into a project and you say, I'm going to edit this much, it's an adaptive thing. You need to see what the situation is and adapt, and your goal is just to make the project sound right for what the project is, so that nothing sticks out and that it has the best chance it can possibly have. You know, like I've told you before, I've worked with certain inexperienced people, rappers, you know, less musical musicians who maybe you have to do 200, 300 takes while you're recording them. But it's part of the job. You know, if you've taken on the job and you're trying to make a good sounding end result, I'm not going to say a product, but a good sounding end result that both makes you look good, makes the client look good, and it's just, well, you're not just gonna stick to your guns and release something that's really, really bad just because that's your set of morals, you know? It just doesn't make any sense. That's not going to benefit anyone, you know? And that doesn't mean you have to agree as well. That's another thing. That doesn't mean you have to agree with, you don't have to say, oh, this is great music or whatever. But if you're doing the job, then you've got to do the best job possible and do it justice, you know?
I mean, at the same time, I understand that from the audience perspective, that's what I'm saying a lot. In general, when I'm talking to other people about music, we live during crisis. We live through a crisis because we have the new tools that made it possible for average musicians to sound way much better. And of course, I'd love to enjoy better music. That's what it comes back to. Of course, we'd prefer if every band was Queen or every band was AC/DC. Of course, we'd prefer that. But they were Queen and AC/DC not because they could record without tuning. They were Queen and AC/DC because they wrote all those songs and they had those personalities.
Yes. That's a big part of it.
That's what made them immortal in art, in our civilization, not tuning or absence of tuning. They had distortion.
Yeah.
And they had lots of things like people before them didn't have. So what? Yeah.
I mean, we've talked about it in other episodes as well. Like if you go back and listen to any of that stuff, you will find tons of flaws. And you like the flaws. You re-sing the flaws. When you re-sing a song and there's a mistake, you sing the mistake, you know?
Exactly.
Yeah, and you sing.
So and by that you improve. You create the sound of a certain era. So there was a sound of 70s, the sound of 80s with gated reverbs, with early sampling machines and synth and everything, and algorithmic reverbs that could be like 10 seconds long. Then you had the sound of 90s, the early autotune kicks in, right? And every era has its own sound with its own technological inventions that get implemented, used by original artists. So we say, hey, there is no Queen now, we have autotune, okay, but we have other artists. For me, Queen is greater, but who knows, maybe for some people those artists they define their, maybe not their life or the universe, but at least they define their leisure to the point like they make the life better for those people. So these artists deserve to be great, even if they heavily rely on what we consider to be cheating.
Yeah. I think to be honest, that's a pretty good kind of place to end this episode. I mean, unless there's anything else we want to go into, I think we could go into. I talked about maybe going into like more in depth our process, but I feel like that's not really what this episode was about. It was more about the philosophy.
Yeah. I mean, both of us are. I'm afraid both of us are too far gone into. Too far gone to be non-specific. We are trying to discuss things in general, but we still just go down the rabbit hole of discussing things in detail in the engineering from the engineering point of view, unfortunately. But we are doing our best to really to discuss things from different viewpoints.
Yeah.
And I think that discussing things in great detail would be wrong. Instead, it would be great to discuss such things separately.
Yeah.
To have a dedicated episode to precisely, like, let's say, nerd material, right? For certain people.
Talk about, and we can do a different episode at some point talking about when we do go about recording and producing vocals, the whole process of, we usually do this and then this and then this and then this. But I think it was important in this episode, first off, to just talk more about, like, what is the general philosophy? Is it good? Is it bad? What is the? And I think we've come to good conclusions. I'd say if we were to summarize, hopefully you agree, there is no right or wrong. And I think most successful professional engineers would have the same viewpoint, which is that they don't really care at the end of the day. They're not going to be like, I want to use this many samples, this much tuning. It's just they look at the projects on a day-by-day basis and, like, what does it need to get to where it needs to be the best song it can be, the best end result it can be, where the most number of people are going to get something from that, whether it be emotion or whatever, it just needs to be right, regardless of what that means. Yeah,
treat it like that. So let's say you're a singer, you're the audience, you're a listener of the band, you're a fan of, let's say, Jinjer. And you want to hear the most authentic Tatiana's vocals, the most true Tatiana's vocals. You don't want to hear studio crap. You want to hear her soul coming from the speakers. So I, as a producer, I give her the SM7B instead of some studio microphone because I know she will hold it with her hands the way she does it live. It will make her feel more relaxed. It will help her deliver the most natural, authentic performance. And I don't care that this microphone with some maybe plosives, with some moving around, and even with some cupping, she did that. It will sound worse. I don't care. I want that performance to be better. And the same thing with tuning. I'd rather get her to sing me 3 great, even 2 great takes, inspired takes that she enjoys. And I will slightly tune a couple of the notes to make it fit the studio listening experience, instead of torturing her into creating a completely uninspired mechanical take that will sound great in terms of how it intonates, but it will sound awful in terms of how it gets the lyrics and the emotional message through to the audience. So actually, I'm doing a service to the audience instead of doing the disservice by improving. I would probably ruin her performance if I do the opposite thing. So that's again, you cannot really explain the misconception without going into detail. That's why we have to go into detail, even if we're trying to just cover the very surface of this topic. And we could go, as you said, way, way deeper into each and every aspect of editing. But it would probably take like 7 hours or 8 hours. Yeah. We won't do that.
Yeah, we'll leave that for another day. But that will be a fun time as well, because at that point, we'll basically be in the mindset of, we're doing editing at this point. So it's okay to edit at this point. And once we say it's okay to edit, this is what we do. But yeah, I think that's a good point to end it there. And
Agreed.
Again, as I say, Tatiana and Jinjer is a perfect example of everything we've talked about in this episode. Because you're not doing nothing, you're not doing a ton, you're doing just what needs to be done to get it to where it needs to be. A great singer with a couple of slightly out of tune notes that you can just fix to get it to where no one's going to complain, really.
And again, if their genre demanded heavy editing, if that would be their trademark sound, I would gladly do that heavy editing. So if they were playing a synth poppy metal, like Amaranthi, I would probably make sure that everything locks in like 0 cents to the synth, to the trance synth waves, that kind of genre. since they're playing guitar-driven, bass-driven, very organic sounding acoustic drums, 90s inspired in terms of audio production material, they need a totally different approach. So, but again, that's like saying that a certain drug is always bad while some medicine uses that component to heal heavy diseases.
Yep. There's no black or white to this conversation. And the simple answer
as always.
Yeah, you just need to do what needs to be done and get used to it, because that's just how it works in the professional audio world. Anyway, I think that's a good place to end it, Max. It was really good talking with you.
Thanks, man.
Great times as always, and I'll see you next time.
See you next time.
Cheers, mate. Bye.